learning experiences, engagement, but mostly and most importantly, we thought connection to one another and connection to their teachers in the school community. So when we do start to present this, and I'm sorry that you can't actually see that so well on your screen. Maybe there's something I can do to slide that over.
My understanding is that I'm getting a message here that it's HCAM is just there. All they can see is a black screen right now.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I actually just tried to pull it up because I did get that message as well. And we aren't listed on the HCAM live streams at this time.
So maybe it's being recorded and not live streamed.
Oh, wait a minute. Yep, it's not there.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, Carol.
No, it's okay.
No, that's all right. It's important that people are able to access this.
No.
Yet I was pretty certain that Jim Cousins was going to be recording this from behind the scenes.
So not broadcasting?
Sorry, I've been talking with the mute button on.
I know that Georgette is listening to this, so maybe she's able to make some connection with Jim behind the scenes.
I just emailed him as well. Poor
okay,
guy.
Great.
Thank you, Jen.
Sure.
Why don't we keep moving along, Dr. Kavanaugh, and
Okay.
Then come back if need be.
Sure. So I will move on to the second. Why is this taking so long? I guess in terms of length, no matter what it is that we implement starting on April 6th, it will never be the same sort of quality that children are getting if they are sitting in our classrooms for 6.5 hours a day with a teacher in front of them, working with other children. There's just not that same level of quality of education. That said, it will be our goal to see how far we can get in the curriculum between now and June 23rd. It's a little disappointing that we may not get back to school this year, but we are going to try to have the highest quality remote education that we possibly can. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education recommends that we ask students to engage in learning that should take about half of the day. So kids will have particular times of the day when they can, at the secondary level, where they will be interacting with their English teacher, their math teacher, their science teacher. And, so for example, the English teacher may interact with you on Monday, but not have a reason to on Tuesday. And in the meantime, there is work that you would be doing sort of independently until you catch back up with that teacher again, which could happen on Wednesday. But given the fact that our kids have 7 classes a day, and if we were piping in a teacher for 7 hours a day, that would sort of eliminate all of that time because typically in a classroom, the teacher isn't teaching the entire time. What's happening is kids are interacting, they're working on things independently. Now what will happen is kids will have to work on small groups that they may arrange in their own household. So there will certainly be a whole lot of learning going on, but it's not going to be in that same time frame. Some of it will be synchronous, meaning that the teacher and the student will agree to meet up at a particular time of day. And sometimes that will be all 24 kids in a classroom. Sometimes that could be 75 kids across 3 sections of the same course. Sometimes that might be 5 students who are struggling with a particular concept. But a lot of this will be synchronous, but a lot of it will be asynchronous as well. So if a student gets up in the morning and doesn't have an English class until 10 o'clock, but maybe has a math class at 9 and then nothing else till 2. That could be happening. Originally, that was not the messaging that came from the state. Now that is the messaging that's coming from the state. And so that's the track that we will proceed on. And number 7, are we ever going to get to cover all that we would have before June 23rd? Absolutely not. And so one of the reasons that this is taking so long is that we have our curricular leaders, CTLs, SMLs, at this point taking a look at what are those power standards? What are the things that we think our kids need before they can advance from one grade to the next? So for example, without which you wouldn't want a second grader to progress into third grade, or without which you wouldn't want a student to go from algebra 1 to more advanced mathematics. All right, so what has been happening with our curriculum? Just gonna move it over here. In the beginning, what we were doing is we were sort of researching and vetting resources for remote learning. There are other districts across the state of Massachusetts that had been approved to do alternative structured learning days, ASLDs, and people know that better as blizzard bags. Hopkinton was not one of those communities. And so we were sort of on hold. With the commissioner had said if you weren't approved to do that, and this is really the last year that they're offering that, then you weren't going to sort of get credit for the days that you were doing that kind of instruction. And so we were in a holding pattern for a little bit there. But behind the scenes, we were connecting with our technology department, and I do want to have a shout out here to our tech director, Mr. Ghosh, and his entire department. They have been working tirelessly to get all kinds of resources and all kinds of tech platforms up and running that are developmentally appropriate. So at the elementary level, for example, our teachers are all across the board kind of like messing around right now with Seesaw to see if that's the way they want to push out information, or Zoom. And at the high school and middle school levels, there are other things that we're thinking about using that would be more appropriate for kids at those grade levels. We are creating opportunities for collaboration between the administrators, the curriculum directors, classroom teachers, and now we are thinking about moving in the direction of special education now that we have guidance from the department. And we are making sure that there are connections between our educators and students and families. That right there has been the most important criterion to all of us. In terms of moving forward, so we will now start remote learning opportunities that are going to include new instruction. And there will also be review, enrichment, some form of assessment and feedback. We will be recording those assessments so that parents will be able to see the kinds of progress that their kids are making. We will be securing ways in which educators and related service providers are going to be delivering remote instruction. We will review the curriculum to highlight those critical skills and that important content that kids are going to need to go from one grade level to another. We will be ensuring connections between educators and families, and we will be refining that process as we go. We're all sort of fumbling in the dark here because this is the first time that public K-12 education has gone fully online. Those typical face-to-face in a classroom kinds of education. This is going to be a huge change for our educators. All right, so what are some of those remote learning opportunities? We have Google Hangouts, Epic, Mayon, Scholastic Online, Freckle, Mind Yeti, Lunch Doodles with Mo Willems, Google Classroom, by phone, by TV, Brain Pop, Zoom, and Canvas. So all of those things are things that we are kind of messing around with now and finding out which would be the best way to deliver different types of content, different types of skills, and at what grade level. All right, so that's where we are with curriculum and instruction. I know that there are families who are very eager to move on to the next phase. If there is any hesitation at all, on our part, it really has only been to make sure that we are delivering to children the very best online education that we can. So our remote learning experience will start fully on the 6th of April. All of next week, however, all of the enrichment and engagement opportunities will still be there, and we're encouraging kids to stay connected. So moving on, COVID-19 and budget questions. And let me tell you that this is really at a 30,000 foot level because people continue to ask us, oh, what are we saving in FY20? I can tell you not something that falls within the purview of the school department. The MIAA dictates whether or not there will be spring sports. They started with one date of April 4th and pushed it out to April 27th. And now my guess is it's pushed out to May 4th. So my guess is it would be very difficult for us to have a spring sports season. But again, that's not my decision or Mr. Bishop's decision to make. And then the last question is, what about advancing to the next grade? What Commissioner Riley has said is that students will in fact advance to the next grade. We're going to try to push out as much curriculum as we can between now and June 23rd. And I don't think I can say it frequently enough that we certainly will never cover as much curriculum between now and June 23rd as we would if we had students in front of us every day. So that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. What that will mean is that school districts will have to do an assessment. How far did we get with the curriculum? And we will have to kind of gauge when kids come back to school in the fall, where are we? You know, how much do kids know? How much remediation needs to be done in a particular grade level or course before teachers will advance with what would be the typical curriculum at that grade level or in that course? All right, so what else is happening? These are the good news pages. The statement of interest for the Elmwood School has been submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, so the MSBA received that yesterday. And the Student Opportunity Act will still be seeking information from the community, but that plan deadline was originally the 1st of April, and that has been extended by the commissioner as well. And what you see on the right-hand side of this screen, this is actually the greatest news that we've had, and perhaps I should have mentioned this in recognitions, but I knew it would be mentioned here. Mr. Scott, as only Mr. Scott can, has reached out to several of his students, and those students who have 3D printers at home, coupled with the ones that are at school, which Mr. Scott is now calling the bunker. They are creating face shields like the one you see Mr. Scott wearing, and they are going off. And he's been working with the Hopkinton Police Department and the Board of Health, making these sort of available for distribution. Interestingly, this has become such a popular thing, first around the state, and now he actually has schools doing this across the nation. But my favorite of all the stories around this is that Cape Cod Hospital reached out to him and asked him if he would be able to produce 60,000 shields. And we did have to laugh about that because if you imagine the production that's going on, this is really like a person has 2 3D printers on their dining room table right now producing these. So I don't think we can produce 60,000 shields for the Cape Cod Hospital, but we will continue to do this because it's a lovely way, I think, for our community to sort of help out doing something that's really super productive. So thank you to Mr. Scott and all those kids. And that's it. That sort of rounds it out. So I'm not sure if the committee has questions.
So questions.
I don't have a question, but I am getting another comment from the public that we are not, the live stream has gone down again.
I agree.
I got something to Nancy that it's going on and off. So I think from our end, if we can continue the meeting and perhaps post this recording, hopefully this is getting recorded well, and go with that, right? And if not, maybe we will have to reconvene. We'll figure that out.
The audio recorder.
Yes, we can always use the audio recording as well.
Is that actually being used right now?
I think there
if
is a recording.
If we could put the recorder on just so that we can get minutes accurately if we're not able to broadcast it later.
Just so you know, it is on YouTube. I know some folks are trying to get to it through the HCAM site, but I found the live stream on YouTube and it seems to be working. Okay. So I've gotten a few questions about that too, and I've been sending that link out and it seems to be working.
Okay, great. Dr. Kavanaugh, I have a couple of questions. I think this is great what you have presented. I think it gives a good picture of what you know, what you don't know, what's coming up. I think it's very helpful. It covers many, many aspects that are impacting our school community. Thank you for putting this together. And also, living through all of these unknowns every day, new information coming, and having to decipher all of that.
Well, thank you. Sometimes I feel almost inept because I know that there are so many questions out there, but right now we don't have all of the answers. And so I am grateful to the community for their patience.
Thank you. I have two questions for you, or maybe three. The first one, you know,
Commissioner was originally very reluctant to put out new curriculum to families. And I think that that comes as a result of not every family is going to be able to access this curriculum. We have to be very honest with ourselves. We've had some people who have reached out to our principals who will say, I'm a nurse in an emergency room, and so I am not home all day long. And my kids are having difficulty logging in because they're young children to have conversations or to sit for morning meeting with their third grade or their first grade teachers. And so we really have to be very careful about the ways that we are recording information and making it available later in the day, or asking first graders and second graders to do work that would normally be supported by the teacher in the classroom, paraprofessionals in the classroom, because in many homes those resources do not exist. So I thank you for that question, because I'm not sure that all families understand sort of the plight of their neighbors.
The second question I have is for our teachers. What are some of the challenges that they're facing, and what additional supports are being provided to them? Do they require training? Do they have home office setups where we're thinking of kids and providing them, with those remote access and whatnot? We have been, our whole education, public education primarily relies on the face-to-face interaction in the physical space. And overnight, we seem to be trying to figure this out, a virtual learning environment. Do they have the setups? What training is being done? What's happening on that front?
So in terms of training, the training really has been either curriculum specialists who are helping them to sort of get curriculum together that is the kind of stuff that kids can do somewhat independently in their homes. I believe that Mr. Ashok, Mr. Ghosh, and all of his team have been super helpful in coming up with new platforms and pushing that out, very slowly, very patiently with teachers. And teachers are in, varying states of tech savviness. I mean, some of them are exceptionally good and really need no support and could start pushing out material tomorrow. But there are other teachers who are people who are accustomed to using, just a couple of programs on their computers, and that's all that they do every day. So to actually be able to teach remotely and to be able to collect work remotely and to give feedback remotely, that's a huge stepping stone for a lot of our people. And if I can sort of just take the committee and the community into households, if we have a teacher, say, who has a child who is preschool aged, that teacher typically finds daycare for those children all during the day, or many of our teachers have school age children, so while the teacher is in school, their children are in school. Right now, there can be teachers who are also moms who have 4 kids, 3 kids, 2 kids, 1 kid, kids with special needs, and all of that is taking place in a household. So if you are a mom with 4 children and at 10 o'clock in the morning, something is scheduled for every single one of those kids, there may not be enough devices in that household to put a device in the hand of every child. Or if you have a child who has special needs, and that child needs support in the work, there's only so much time that the special educator is available to that child. So now the mom kind of has to take over as a special educator, but also as a teacher of the students in the Hopkinton Public Schools. So there's an awful lot, I think, that's going on in teachers' households, and we have to really be sensitive to the fact that there's limited time, limited devices, limited child care, limited support for students with special needs. There's an awful lot going on. So I appreciate your question, Nina, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. A couple of other questions come to mind. One, you've shared a lot that is happening at the state level, guidance coming from that aspect. And when we look at our state, our neighbors and us, not all of us are in the same kind of a demographic or needs or what have you. How much room is there to apply some things locally? Is there any room for that?
So I'm going to apply what things?
So anything that we would like to do in our district, for instance.
Differently from what's happening in other districts?
That's right. So DESE is giving their regulations or saying these are some of the things to do, but we know our community best. Is it possible to make those accommodations specific to our community? How much room is there for you to do that?
Sure. So I think that we took what I would consider to be kind of a moderate approach. We took guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in the beginning, and now we are going to start putting out new curriculum, new instruction, new assessments, all of that. There are still districts across the state that are not going to be doing that. They're going to kind of keep kids in a place where they are interacting with teachers, but no new instruction. So I think that what we need to do is what is right for Hopkinton. And I'm not necessarily sure that we know exactly what that is today. We will know better once we start implementing online instruction. One of the key components to the work that we're doing is sort of an attendance model. So if we have 24 kids in a second grade classroom, for example, that second grade teacher is going to be monitoring who shows up, so to speak. So if we have all 24 kids are coming 3 days a week, but 2 days a week we only have 18. At least we have a sense that in that particular classroom, kids are remaining engaged if they can't be engaged every single day of the week. And that's perfectly fine, we think. But our fear is that over time, we're going to have kids that we just don't see. And what will that end up looking like? So we're monitoring very closely who is there and who is not there, because if families need food or devices or those kinds of things, we can reach out to folks and be able to do that. And I think that that's something that, Hopkinton has always been very good at, right? When somebody needs something in order to be able to first survive and then maybe access curriculum, which I see at this point is very secondary to survival. This is a community that can, I think, engage in that process very nicely.
Right.
Nina,
Dr. Kavanaugh.
Can I jump in, because I just want to add to what she's saying, if you're going to move on to a different topic? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
I think it's really important for us all to realize that some of us are in a greater place of privilege than others. And we do have a number of students who, if new material is introduced into the curriculum, will not have equal access to that curriculum according to the law. And so there might be some houses which are set up really beautifully to help their children. There might just be 1 or 2 kids. Both of them have internet access. None of them may have any special needs or learning differences. But there will be households where that is just not the case. And so what you're doing is you're disenfranchising a portion of the student population if you introduce new curriculum that all students do not have equal access to. I don't hear of any universities trying to introduce this at such a rate. Many universities have now decided to go over to a pass-fail grading method because they're well aware of the inherent material inequities from house to house. And so, I'm flabbergasted by all that you've been able to accomplish as an administration in these past 10 days. I mean, wow, steep learning curve, and you have hit every mark. But I feel sad that you feel some pressure from the community to all of a sudden ramp up the competitive engine again. And I really want to just say that this is not fair. This is absolutely not fair for those kids who need some help in enabling them to better focus when they're not accustomed to interacting with a screen. And so I just want people to really sit for a moment and acknowledge the amount of privilege they may have in their own lives that many people do not have. And I'm just sorry that in our district, we're already feeling like we have to press new curriculum and grading implementation and not really thinking about our most vulnerable population. But which I think you are, Carol. I absolutely think you are. But I would just ask everyone to take a deep breath.
Yes, and thank you for that, Meg, really, because that is a great concern of our administrators and our teachers, those students who are, the kids that we are going to have to keep a very close eye on. And really, that's that whole nature of the attendance piece. Are we seeing these kids? Are they able to do the work? If not, what's the obstacle? And if this needs to be slow and steady, it will be slow and steady. And I think that that's just the nature of education when it's public education. And in the face of a pandemic, we have to think about all of our learners and how to help every child to advance.
And I know you're doing that, and I thank you. I just hope we can help encourage the rest of the community to lead with their hearts right now, and to lead with the community in mind and not themselves. Sorry, Mina.
No, that's okay. I think, we understand the concerns that Meg is bringing forth. And I think those have been at the forefront all the way across. So Dr. Kavanaugh, you were talking a little bit about looking at our community and trying to understand what can be done in our community. And I know there's still a lot of work, and based on what you have shared, it looks like some of these things and plans that get rolled out will truly happen only after April 7th, and that, until then, at least, it's certainly a clear pause. And I know this is a difficult time for everybody. Is there any plan or any thought around involving perhaps some of those bodies in these conversations? Or maybe it's already happening. So just wanted to understand that a little better.
So at this point, and I've had these conversations, I think, over the last couple of weeks with the building principals. We're really just trying to wrap our heads around what the new normal looks like. We don't have that answer. We could get 2 weeks into teaching new material and realize that this thing is just disastrous, right? We don't know. I guess what I would say is that once we are in a place where the curriculum seems to be a little bit more sound and set, and this new normal, as much as I hate using that terminology, actually feels a little more comfortable to all of us, then I would think that it would be, appropriate for principals to start doing the things that they would typically do, right? And reach out to groups like, their school councils, or if they have to have those kinds of meetings. But we'll be having these meetings remotely,
Right. And I guess the reason why I ask is, will parents be part of some of these conversations and trying to understand and lend that voice of some of the pain that I'm hearing? One thing that I've certainly heard from parents is that some of this is optional, not mandatory. Are you able to comment a little bit and share why that is?
Yes, that was part of the first phase. When the commissioner had said that he really didn't want us moving forward with curriculum, he had said that he would like for us to put things out to make sure that kids were still engaged and families felt connected to school. I mean, if school is that place where children go for 6.5 hours a day, 5 days a week for 40 weeks out of the year, to be severed from that, it's going to be pretty disconcerting, I think, for kids and for families. So he wanted that kind of connection. But he also had said to us that when you put that learning out there, and we kept calling them remote learning experiences, they have to be pretty much voluntary. So students can either engage or not engage, but you really shouldn't move forward in the curriculum. That was the message loudly and clearly from the commissioner. Anyway, at this point, that has changed. So he has pretty much said now that districts should do what feels best for that particular district. He does want kids engaged in learning, whether learning means that you're going to continue to practice the skills that you've already been taught, whether learning means enrichment kinds of learning, whether learning means project-based learning. But whether you introduce new curriculum or not is entirely up to your individual school district.
Dr. Kavanaugh, any which way we look at it, this is extremely challenging.
It is.
And, for parents, for teachers, for community members, for everyone involved here, for you, for all the administrators. I'm wondering, as we move on this path of the new normal, what kind of consistency and communication specifically, can be expected? Is there some plan around just sharing some of this in a periodic manner? I know you have been sending emails with all the information that you have. What can parents expect on that front?
So I will continue to put out information, but I think that the best communication to families comes in the form of the classroom teacher. I think kids are thrilled to hear from their classroom teachers.
Okay, great. Those were my questions. Other questions from other members? Is anyone on mute and speaking? No?
On mute. Now I'm speaking.
Okay.
No, I think most of my questions were covered throughout the presentation, and I do appreciate a lot what Meg said. I mean, I think I'm very thankful that the district has focused on well-being of our staff and our families in the short term. I'm one who's always pushing excellence in education, and I'm one of those sort of hardcore about the academics kind of person. But in this particular circumstance, I think the greatest impact that I've seen, at least in my small circle, is those points of just connecting with the teachers, just being able to engage with the class and the teacher, even if the curriculum is not moving forward, just to see each other, just to say, hey, we're still here. And I think that comfort of still being part of your own community, especially really at all ages. I mean, the older kids, that is their life. I mean, their whole life is at school. And I think the younger kids, the same thing. I mean, they spend 6 hours a day there. So I'm thankful that if we, at a minimum, can maintain those consistent points of connection and then build from there. I think we just have to all, to Meg's point, breathe and move forward. And I'm very confident that if we find ourselves on June 23rd, not having met what we think is the required curriculum to advance, I'm very confident that we'll adjust the curriculum in the fall. Maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but it just seems natural to think that way, and I'm assuming that's what we will do. So I have a lot of faith in you and the administration. I definitely want to keep in contact and hear as plans take shape. But I think starting where we're starting with just being engaged is the right place to start. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions, thoughts?
I'll just add in a couple thoughts. And I guess I probably should have said this during recognitions, because I really do think the teachers have done an excellent job of reaching out to the kids. I can speak specifically to Hopkins and the middle school. Both of my kids get up in the morning. They know school starts at 9, and they go and they check out, and they can't wait. They can't wait to see what their teachers have posted. So I'm so grateful for those teachers who have really stepped up at the middle school and in Hopkins. And, I imagine the other schools are the same. And so I'm speaking from experience because I am a teacher, and we've been spending, probably double our normal workload trying to convert our curriculum into something that can be accessible virtually. And, as everyone has pointed out, some stuff just can't be accessed virtually. So I think, trying to find creative ways to teach it in a different way or expose children to in a different way is something that the teachers have done a great job in Hopkinton. And I think, the kids it because they're not being graded. So I think, as we move forward, it is a slow process to take curriculum that you'd normally present face-to-face and convert it to something virtual. So we need patience, as Meg said, we need patience because there is a ton of work going on behind the scenes. I don't know that Dr. Kavanaugh has slept in the last 10 days. I know that folks in the state for sure haven't. And a lot of the teachers are putting in a ton of extra time doing what they can to convert their curriculum. So it really is just be patient. It will come together. We just need to be calm about it.
Well, thank you for that. And I should also recognize our teachers, the building principals. I mean, it is true that I don't think any of us have slept very well in a very, very long time. We're working really hard. So thanks, Jen.
Any other comments before we move on to the next item?
So I just wanted to echo what other people have said about the amazing effort that's gone into all of this from our educators, administrators, and everybody. But also just wanted to comment on the 3D printing is very cool and meaningful in the world. So thank you for everything.
Hurrah for technology. We are appreciating technology now. I like that. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, SC Chair Report. I have approved warrants numbers 20-048, number 20-049, number 20-050, and number 20-051. The warrants have been included in your packet. Besides that, I have also, on behalf of the school committee, submitted the Elmwood SOI, which Dr. Kavanaugh had detailed through the process. And based on, Dr. Kavanaugh had shared that with the entire school committee, and based on the feedback she received and her recommendation, I moved forward to approve it electronically. And this application currently has details of a 2 to 5 elementary school and some other changes. And Dr. Kavanaugh has also shared that this is a preliminary proposal and is by no means final. And this is something that we will review fully as a community, and the focus will be on the replacement of Elmwood School. So I'm hoping, with all these things that are going on, hopefully all of this will move forward, and some of the conversations of CEG will also continue. Besides that, Select Board announced at their last meeting that the annual town meeting will be held on June 22nd this year, and town elections will be held after that. Both Jen, Devlin, and our term ends this year, and we were asked if we would continue to serve until the town elections, and both of us have confirmed the same. And hopefully we will get to know the date for the town elections at the next select board meeting. Also, there was a concern raised that some of the documents that we were referencing related to the budget were not posted or not accessible to the public to follow along. The documents we reviewed with a comprehensive budget document from budget discussions. It was not a new document from the school perspective. And of course, we had referenced the town hall's budget document from March 12th. Dr. Kavanaugh requested our town manager to share the additional document with the member of public. Also, a suggestion was made to have a drive available and accessible to the public where documents created all the way up to the meeting can be added. I think it's a good suggestion, and with the committee's consent, worth exploring. I don't know whether that's something we want to take on right now with everything that's going on, but I think generally we do have some items, for instance, tonight's report that Dr. Kavanaugh shared in detail. If that's something, some of these are being worked on until the last minute, so they can be added later on and made accessible. I think it'll help public to follow along. The next thing that I wanted to share was we had received a concern related to the transportation policy. We will review that, those questions raised by the member of the public when we review the transportation policy. Besides that, Appropriations Committee member has raised a question to the Select Board and the School Committee if it makes sense for Appropriations Committee to move forward with the overall FY 2021 budget review, knowing state tax revenues will likely get impacted, and with ATM pushed off to June 22nd, and with all that's going on in the schools and also towns work on the public health front, while financial planning and preparedness is important, there's too much going on at this point. What I have requested is that both obviously planning and preparedness on the financial front is important for the FY21. However, having a clear guideline on what that means and a timeline which is reasonable and respectful to the work that's going on, especially on the school front, is what I've requested. I haven't heard back on that front yet. Hopefully, there might be an update at the select board meeting next week, and I'll bring that update back for everyone. That's what I have for chair report. Liaison reports. If anyone wants to unmute.
I have just a quick one from Hop Coalition. Actually, it's from Don Alcott, Youth and Family Services. There's a free webinar, which may be of interest to people. She wanted me to get the word out. Helping teens cope with anxiety during COVID-19. The webinar is on Thursday, April 2nd from 2 to 3 p.m. And you can just register. It's, like I said, it's free. And it's a topic that may be very relevant to a lot of families right now. So if anyone is interested, they can either reach out to me or to Don Alcott at Youth and Family Services to get the information for registration.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Any other liaison reports? I guess both Amanda and I have been working a little bit on the procedure front, and there's one item coming up later on in the agenda. But also we have started to look at the budget process a little bit, and looked at modeling that, and just started to brainstorm how we have been doing the budget process and what are the possible points we could define procedurally. So hopefully in one of our upcoming meetings, we will bring that back for the committee's review. Also, Jim Cousins has reached out to all of us about a hangout hour that he's doing. Some of us have confirmed that we're able to join. I think it's a great idea to continue to stay engaged in some shape or form. I have accepted to join the hangout hour sometime next week. I think next Friday is when it's my turn. Hopefully all of you will consider it as well. I think it's good for the community to continue to see how we're faring. The next item on the agenda is office hours. We had canceled our office hour from earlier this month. We had plenty of music and concerts that we were hoping to have our office hours at, which got canceled. So one thought that Nancy and I discussed was to have a virtual office hours. I know there's a lot going on for each one of us too. We are also
I think that would be great, especially considering how truncated my social life is now. It would afford me with a good opportunity for socialization. So I'm all for it, Meena. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, likewise. I think office hours would be a great idea.
Okay, so we had talked about possibly, March 31st, which is, 4 days from now. Maybe we can publicize that a little bit and figure out an hour or two and figure out the mechanism, if we should do Zoom or something else, and we take turns. If we're not, obviously we're not posting it. So, we could have 2 members at a time for the hour or so. So we'll take care of that. Nancy, that's on you and me. Okay, that sounds great. It sounds good, Nancy?
Perfect.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, new business policy EEAA transportation services. First reading, Dr. Kavanaugh.
So I will start this, but the transportation working group is made up of Mrs. Fargiano and Mrs. Devlin. So I would invite them to jump into this conversation at any point in time. We are bringing this forward now because this is the point in time when we start preparing for transportation in the fall of 2020. So even though it might seem like, this is coming along at this point in time for a first reading, it's an important time frame only because our transportation department is sort of getting up and running for next year. So we did take a look at this policy. The old policy was EEA, and this one has been renamed EEAA. And I think that we had done that only because it fit in with the policy lettering for MASC. All right, and so a couple of the things that we have looked at in here. We are looking to move to having students have one morning pickup location and one afternoon drop-off location. One of the advantages that we have sort of this time out is that there will be aftercare in Elmwood, Marathon, and Hopkins next year. So if a student would like to have access to aftercare at Elmwood, for example, the student can simply stay there, or that student could go home on his, or her own afternoon school bus. So I think that that resolves some of the issue. Now, if a parent had a child who was at Hopkins and a child at Elmwood and wanted the Elmwood student to go off to the Hopkins location, that your one pickup place in the afternoon would mean that the Elmwood student could get bused to Hopkins, and that would be your one location. Right now, we're making these decisions, and they have a sort of strong budgetary background, and we are doing it because we have students who have seats on multiple buses. So if on Monday I ride bus 7, on Tuesday bus 8, and on Wednesday bus 9, while I'm on the Monday bus, bus 8 and bus 9 are riding around with a seat reserved for me, but I'm not in it. And, that's starting to cost us some money. And I think that next year we'll be going from 29 buses this year to 31 school buses next year. So we are really just trying to streamline the transportation policy and to some degree kind of clear up some of the confusion. At the end of the school day, we have teachers putting students on different buses, different days of the week. And I'll be very honest, we sometimes lose kids. And by lose, I don't mean that we permanently lose them, but they realize that, halfway through the bus route that it's Tuesday and they shouldn't be on this bus. So they get driven back to school and, or the bus driver is sometimes able to, drop everybody else off on the bus and then take that student to the appropriate location. So there's kind of like craziness that goes on those afternoon buses. And I'll let the two of you talk a little bit about some of our decision making as well.
Go ahead, Amanda, you can go.
No, I'm good. I mean, I think you covered it well. I think with the new, as you said, with the new childcare options available at all of our schools, it really helped us to look at a change that we thought would be better for student safety, for sure, because there are students who do occasionally fall through the cracks, and just better for our budget, which is obviously constrained this year. And I think, for me personally on the committee, in light of just that horrible bus issue with Holy Cross down in Florida, and the horrible tragedies that happened there, was just a stark reminder that the bus drivers really are there to drive the bus, and the more that we look to them to make sure they are figuring out where every individual kid has to go, that's not something that they can do. So I think we want the bus drivers to drive the bus. We want to streamline how we use the bus, allow everybody a morning and an afternoon, but the simpler we can get, I think the better for everybody, and for the budget, and for the students, and for the drivers. So that was kind of some of our thinking.
Yes, and I think also as we grow, a couple of years ago, we only had to keep track of, 3,000 students. Now we're keeping track of 4,000 students. So it's, as we grow, it becomes a much bigger management issue for the administrators. I know that Dr. Kavanaugh mentioned that there's a person who basically spends her day ensuring that the children are getting on the bus that they're supposed to be getting on based on all the changes that happen on any given day. So I think, we need to streamline this process. And now that there's childcare at all 3 elementary schools, parents can either choose to have them stay, or they can choose a bus stop where they want that child to get off, and it doesn't have to be their house. So I think this is a good sort of compromise between what we had in the past, and knowing that parents still want some flexibility, but we need to make sure that we have the safety of the kids first and foremost, and then also that we have sort of the fiduciary responsibility to the town. Our budget is becoming bigger and bigger as a result of our growth, so we need to make responsible choices, and transportation is one where we can make some pretty responsible choices.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the issue of the administrative assistants. So at Marathon, Elmwood, and Hopkins, there are people who work in a secretarial capacity who, for almost the entire second half of the day, are really going through all of the bus changes. And we can have 60 or 70 of them in a building in a given day. That feels like an awful lot of change. So, they are really over scrupulous about the job, and they have to be, because we want all of our kids to get on the right buses. But my goodness, from in all afternoon, they are just watching bus changes come in and ensuring that teachers know where students should go.
Are you able to walk us through some of the procedure documents also, and some of the thought process behind that, please?
Yes, so you know what, I will bring that up right now. We had a couple of people who did get in touch with us about this policy. And 2 of the people were, I think, interested in things that I would consider to be procedural. So one of them talked a little bit about the appeals process, and we are putting the appeals process out there front and center so people have a very good sense of what that looks like. It does not fall under the purview of the school committee because it's procedural and school committee governs policy, but we certainly want this to be as transparent as possible. We want people to know that if you are dissatisfied with your bus stop, what is it that you are supposed to do sort of procedurally to have your voice heard? And then and I think I had reviewed this in the transportation presentation I had made, but that appeal goes off to a small committee, and the committee has our director of finance and operations, the bus dispatcher, our transportation coordinator, the superintendent, 2 or 3 school resource officers. And so there are people who are very invested in children and in children's safety, who sit around that table making the decisions about approval or not, or denial really of the appeal. And we want to be very clear with families that if they have already paid their bus fee for the year and they get to a place where they are dissatisfied with the outcome of the appeal, we are happy to work with them on a reimbursement of that bus fee. We certainly don't want to have unhappy customers, but we want our busing to work as seamlessly as it can, and we want our kids to be safe. So the appeals process will be, certainly more transparent, or at least put in a very front and center kind of way so parents can see that.
Great, thank you.
I have to thank Dr. Kavanaugh and Ms. Rothermick and quite a few folks in the district offices, because I think Amanda and I, we heard from the community about some transportation concerns. And even though some of this procedural work doesn't fall under our purview, they really were sort of welcoming as we tried to kind of figure out what the heck, how do these things happen, and how do these processes take place? Are there ways that we could streamline? We kind of stuck our nose where we don't belong, kind of thing, but we did it because we heard from the community, and we wanted to find out if there was anything that we could do to help facilitate change. And I think the folks in the district offices just picked this up and ran with it. The changes to the procedures have been ongoing over the last, 3 months, maybe more than that even. And there've been some really good changes just to try to put everything out there so that folks don't have to search around to find what they need. And once those procedures are done, the plan is to link them to this policy. So when you see it on the website in our policy section on the school committee link in the website, you'll be able to just find those procedures very easily.
And I think just to, I mean, we probably should have started here, but just to kind of define like what goes in a policy, I think when we were discussing, really the policy is a statement of what the school committee wants to offer for a service level, a level of service, more or less. It's what, and if you look at the MASC reference policies, you'll see they're very, very, very short. Ours is much longer, but you know, and I encourage people to go, you can Google the MASC policy reference manual, and people can look at the policy EAA and see what the Mass Association of School Committees is suggesting we use. In Hopkinton, we actually offer more, believe it or not, for some people, but we offer quite a bit more than is minimally required. And so our document is much longer, but it is a statement of our school committee level of service of transportation to the district. And then how that service is delivered is procedural. And so we say, for example, that in Hopkinton, we will provide transportation, I think in the first paragraph, regardless of how far away from the school you live. That's actually beyond what the state requires. The state, I think, has a 2-mile radius. We say, you know, wherever you live, it doesn't matter. K to 6, it's free. And wherever you live, you get busing. We're not asking people within a 2-mile radius to walk or pay. So that's different. The fact that we offer different buses in the morning and the afternoon for our K to 5 students is unique to Hopkinton. So that's why that features in our policy. We want to offer that. We think that's important. How we do think it's important that we have a transparent appeals procedure. How that actually is implemented and the timing, that's really up to the transportation office and the district. And a lot of factors go into how changes to the original routes are made, because they're trying to look at all the changes in some cases, and if there are significant impacts on multiple routes, it's easier to kind of reorganize all those, re-engineer all those together. So there's sort of a method to the madness of holding all the appeals and having an appeals meeting, and how that all plays out. And that's very much up to the transportation office. Again, as Jen said, we were very fortunate that we could share a lot of what we heard, and a lot of the input that we got from the community has gone into the thinking. But provided the procedures are effective, that's, you know, sort of outside of the policy domain.
Right. So, you know, actually, that's the reason why I was surprised to see that level of detail, and that all included in our package, all the procedure documents. So I just wanted to understand what was, you know, going on with all of that. And typically we have the procedures at the bottom, like if there's any cross-reference, right? But we have some of it embedded here in the policy. So I'm sure you all have been working on this, so you understand the consistency of how you want to maintain and manage that. Right. And I appreciate the fact that you have heard and, you know, taken into account some of the things that we heard from the community.
Yes, and I think that is why we put the procedure into your packet, so that people who were interested in this particular policy could see what the procedure looked like. You know, we're certainly not discussing that procedure. It's not on the agenda, but I do think that it appears in the packet for people who are interested.
I have actually a few questions. One is in the section where it says bus stops. It says school bus stops will be at centralized locations.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if we could define that a little further. I know we have talked about safety up front. I think we had talked a little bit about how winding our roads are, different from some other communities, perhaps in certain places. So is it possible to say school bus stops will be at, you know, safe centralized locations, and if there are any parameters around these centralized locations? Did some thought go into that? I'm sure you know, I know how the verbiage goes and you all discuss. I've been through one session, and if you can share some thoughts around that, please.
Sure. I would say that we make sure that all of our bus stops are safe, Or we have language in our policy that says um, that it is the responsibility of parents to get students to our bus stops. So if the bus stops themselves would be safe, but if you feel like transportation from your home to that bus stop is something that you're sort of struggling with, it's really your responsibility as a parent to get your child from the home to the bus stop. And I know people have struggled a little bit with centralized or what we sometimes call consolidated bus stops. But when we have 31 buses going across 31 square miles or 28 square miles, I think is Hopkinton is, across these sort of slow and winding roads, it takes a very long time to be able to pick up and drop off students, especially with multiple runs. And so, we have had to move to consolidated stops. And I know that sometimes it's difficult for parents to be able to transport their child to the bus stop if they feel like the walk from their home to the stop is unsafe. But that is, that's kind of the best that we can do, given the fact that we have to get kids to school on time.
One other thing, Mina, we did talk a lot about how safe is a very subjective in a lot of instances, and how we define it would really dictate quite a bit. And, if we asked every single person in this meeting what, safe is, we would all probably give a slightly different response. So the hard part about policy is we can't define safe. We need to make sure that it's a place where that makes sense for a child to wait. But that determination is not made by policy; it's made by procedure. And if a parent is unhappy with the bus stop because their perception of safety is compromised, that's what the appeals is for. And then we have a room filled with police officers and bus dispatchers and the superintendent, and just to make sure that, or to check and see that maybe there is an indication that this stop needs to be changed, or unfortunately, maybe there's just a sort of differing perception of what safety is. And I think that's a hard thing, because we don't want someone to feel unsafe, but we have to transport 4,000 students. So, it's a slippery slope when we start putting in subjective things into policy, I think. And so we opted specifically not to define safety in the policy.
Okay. Again, just one voice, just with that one sentence. I would feel more comfortable by saying safe, but leaving the definition of safety to the implementation and through the appeals process challenging. That's how I feel about it, that we don't have to define it. That's something that Dr. Kavanaugh and the whole team that's listed in the procedure of who all is, we know it's not a simple process of coming up with these locations. It's a complex process. So my hope is, what is that is something that they define. For instance, I live on a street where the speed limit can be 35, 40 in certain portions of the road. All of that, I would imagine, is something under the purview of the procedural part. But from a policy standpoint, I feel comfortable to say that it has to be safe. That's just me, one voice there. The other question I had was related to drop off. I recall at some point, and maybe I missed it on this policy, we used to have age by when, at what point you need to have a parent or a guardian present to receive the child. Is that part of the policy here?
So we don't state that in this policy, I don't think. And, Mrs. Rothermick, you're here, so if you want to jump into that, you certainly can, but I believe it's our kindergarten kids that have to have a sort of
We say kindergarten in the policy.
person.
Sorry, Carol, we say kindergarten in the policy. Beyond kindergarten, we don't. Yeah, it's right underneath.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah. A parent or guardian or an adult designated by the parent guardian must be at the bus stop for the drop off of all kindergarten students, or the student will be transported back to school.
And I just want to throw it out there. I've wondered many times, especially if you're talking about centralized bus stops, and a first grader, I think it's still young. So just throwing it out there and wondering if there was any conversation and thought process during the policy conversations.
So I guess I'll just go back to the under bus stops, the second sentence where it says it's the responsibility of the parent guardian to ensure safe passage of his or their child over roadways to an established stop. So, we absolutely understand that, at first grade, it might be getting off at that bus stop, but it really becomes the parent's responsibility to know that, if we're asking, a first grader who lives 0.4 miles from the stop, we would not want a first grader walking 0.4 miles, or maybe we would want a 0.4, depending upon, the kids that child walks with. Does he walk with, an older sibling? It's really hard for us to say, which is really why we have avoided defining what is safe, because some families might let their first grader walk with an older sibling who's in third grade. Some families may never allow that to happen. Some families might live in a cul-de-sac with a sidewalk and think there's nothing wrong with it. Some families might live on, a winding road with no sidewalk. So we really are in no position to determine what is safe, because what's safe to me would be very different from a parent or, somebody else who's on, the committee, or we just felt like we weren't in a position to determine other people's safe.
One last question. This is with regard to an email we received about administering EpiPens on the school bus. And if you can share a little bit about how does that get covered? How are the, bus drivers, you talked about safety, right? We want our bus drivers to be focused on driving, but what do they do in emergency of that situation? And what kind of guidelines are available? How is that covered?
So under Mass General Law, there should be no one driving a school bus who is not trained to administer an EpiPen. But when we say that that person is trained to administer an EpiPen, what we mean is that person in an emergency would be able to do that. I think that, we would never want our bus drivers, nor will Connolly Bus allow this to happen, to be the person solely responsible to administer an EpiPen. So it's very different to have been, say, for example, I'm first aid trained, and in an emergency, I might administer first aid to someone. That's sort of the same mindset with the EpiPen. The bus drivers EpiPen trained in an emergency could administer one if there were one there and the bus driver was, and a student was going into anaphylactic shock. But we can't say to that bus driver that it's your job to drive this school bus, maintain discipline, and make sure that that child in seat number 3 doesn't go into anaphylactic shock, because you're not just the bus driver, you're also the person who's solely responsible to administer an EpiPen. But that is, again, one of those things that really doesn't fall under school committee purview. If you look at this section that says students requiring accommodations under IDEA, students who require accommodations under the Individuals with Disabilities Act or 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 are provided transportation in accordance with current statute and regulation and the student's IEP or 504 plan. So what happens is when a student has a particular need, what happens is that that's pretty much worked out through the special education department.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. Other questions from other members?
So I just want to thank you guys. I know a ton of work went into this, and I know that when we have brought up transportation policy in the past, it has evoked a lot of emotion and concern from the community. I'm assuming we're not looking to pass this tonight because it's our first reading.
Correct.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the one suggestion I would have is, I know probably daycares and after school places are starting to look towards next year. If we could share the fact that this policy may be changing so that their families can consider whether or not XYZ after school care makes the most sense for them next year if they're not requiring 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. Just so that I know the last time this went through, we did have concerns from after school care. And I think one of the issues was that it was perhaps later in the year than this that they had received notice that we were doing this or considering doing it, because we didn't do it last time.
Mhm. So because we'll bring it back for another reading, we'll send this back out again if that would be appropriate.
Yeah, I was surprised that we didn't receive any feedback, but I also think folks are coping with much larger issues than thinking about bus transportation for next year right now. So I wonder if, you know, in a couple of weeks, once we've settled in a little bit, if we might receive more feedback. And maybe because of the childcare at all three elementary schools, we may not. So we'll kind of see what happens. Maybe this will work out.
Right.
And I just want to also point out that Carol was just scrolling through the old policy above.
You want me to
And
go back?
if people are looking at the old, if you wouldn't mind, please. If people were looking at the old policy, which I think called out things like bus switching, and we tried to put just policy in the policy document and procedure in the other documents. And so we've retained bus switching, which is the freedom for our older students who are in grade 6 and above to get on a bus different from their home bus in the afternoon. We do have students who really enjoy the freedom to be able to do that. And there are some guidelines around that, which are really procedural. We haven't taken that away. We've retained that. We just pulled it out of the policy document and put it in procedure. But it's the same flexibility is still being afforded to the kids in grade 6 to 12. And likewise, if you're kind of comparing the two documents, and you don't see the same wording, it may be that we put it in a procedure document. So definitely ask if you're looking for something and you don't see it, send us an email for sure. But also consider that that was one of the guiding principles behind our review of the policy.
I will offer quickly too, last year at kindergarten orientation, most of the marathon parents already thought that there was a 5-day-a-week policy. So I know there was discussion last year and they had already assumed that it was a 5-day-a-week and were more than willing to, you know, accept that. They thought that was okay, just so you know.
Good.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Mr. Othamick, and good evening to you. I am wondering if there are any other questions or comments. Okay, so we will move on to the next item on the agenda, policy EEAEC, student conduct on school buses, first reading. Dr. Kavanaugh.
That's bus stop appeal. Sorry. Are we on EEAAPRC? Is that what we're on?
Nope, we're going to the next policy.
Okay, sorry. We had so many procedures here. Oh, there we go. Student conduct on buses. Okay. So this one is EEAEC. I think that the only changes we really made to this one is we've added language at the start of this. Is that correct? And I think that what we are really trying to stress with student conduct on buses, a couple of things. Number one, the bus driver's sole responsibility is really to operate that school bus without distraction. And we are very concerned when our bus drivers are frequently having to, pull the bus over, deal with, students who are doing things that the bus company would say, if you have a student out of the seat walking around, you have to pull the bus over and wait until that child is back in his seat for safety reasons, and then you can continue to drive the school bus. So when we have conduct issues, what we're trying to do is to say to parents, it's really not the school bus driver who needs to discipline a child. The driver should only drive the bus. So what ends up happening is parents are confused about, where do they go if there's some kind of discipline problem that their own kid is having on the bus. You absolutely positively need to go to the assistant principal at any one of the buildings, because assistant principals are those people who deal with the discipline. So if you hear from an assistant principal that your child's having behavior problems on the bus, that's one thing. If you feel like your child is behaving on the bus but experiencing difficulty with another child, in either of those two cases, the person that you should reach out to is the assistant principal. And I don't know if there are other things that we had thought about with student conduct on buses.
I think that was the main point. I think it was really the last sentence of the first paragraph was
Right here.
right in there. We really wanted to make sure it was clear, because that was something that we heard. People were unclear what to do with disciplinary concerns or behavior concerns. And again, I think there will be, I think on the transportation website, if it's not there already, Susan, there will be guidelines for how to reach out to your principal, what to do if you have a behavior concern. It's not for the bus driver, it's for the principal or the vice principal or assistant principal.
Yeah, on the transportation website, there is a document of FAQs, and it's broken out by subject area, if you will. And so there is a whole piece of the FAQ that talks about student conduct. So parents certainly could go there, and hopefully some of the questions they have would already be answered as part of that FAQ.
Great.
Yeah, and I think as you look at the cross references, you'll see that the high school handbook, middle school handbook, elementary school handbooks are all listed here because they also make reference to discipline issues and student conducts on our school buses.
Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh, Amanda, and Jen. Any questions from committee members on this policy? I see Nancy shaking her head. How about you, Meg? Any questions from you? Okay, I don't see her head any which ways. It's static. So,
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. No questions.
okay, so in any event, we will bring this back because this is our first reading, and just wanting to give everyone an opportunity to reflect on this a little bit, especially with, as Nancy talked about, even with the earlier policy, this is a difficult time. We need to give folks the time to react to anything that we're bringing forth here. Okay, also we've received messages that the streaming on YouTube and the TV has not been consistent. So hopefully the recording will have gone on well, and we will be able to share this immediately through various means. We'll have to circle back with HCAM and seek their support in getting that pushed out to folks so they're able to watch it overall, because there is certainly anxiety in the community trying to understand all that was shared, especially with COVID-19 updates Dr. Kavanaugh provided. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, FY21 budget discussion. Dr. Kavanaugh.
All right, so I don't really have much of a discussion. Last time we were together and we had a nice sort of joint session with the select board. We came away understanding that from the FY21 school budget, we would need to make a reduction of $323,000. And on that evening, we had said that it would be important for us to reach out to the entire administrative team. I'll tell you, the administrative team has met many, many times, but not once has that been about budget discussion. And that has really been because I think, as Jen Devlin had beautifully articulated, we are right now in this crazy state of flux where we are just trying to get curriculum down pat, get it into the platforms that we need to, deciding what those power standards are, deciding what it's going to look like when it gets pushed out into, you know, a synchronous moment in someone's living room. So that's really what we have been concentrating on. And I would hope that in the next couple of weeks, once things kind of settle down and we are living in our new normal, we'll be able to do a little bit more with the FY21 budget. And I think the other piece is that, you know, now that we're in this very strange place, we have no idea how the FY20 budget is going to shake out either. So we have a lot of thinking to do, I think, about where we are with the FY21 budget. And I don't know, Mrs. Rothermick, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think that you know, that really sums it up. There are so many variables going on with the FY20 budget right now. Just trying to get our arms around that. And the principals, the CTLs, the SMLs, I mean, everybody has been asked to really look at what is in the FY20 budget, all at the same time that they're trying to push out this whole change of curriculum and instruction. So even doing that for this year's budget is going to take some time before they can even circle back and think about next year.
Thank you, Ms. Rothermick. Any questions, comments from members? Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, the Tech Collaborative Agreement. Dr. Kavanaugh.
All right, so this is very brief as well. You know that we are members of the Tech Collaborative, and it's a phenomenal collaborative to belong to. The superintendent, the director of the Tech Collaborative is Liz McGonigal. And several months ago, oh, it could be over a year ago now, the town of Medway Public Schools asked to join the Tech Collaborative. And so there's a pretty lengthy process that you have to go through. And the Tech Board of Directors has decided that we would like to have Medway become part of the collaborative. In that process, what has happened is, you resubmit the agreement, and that kind of goes through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so there have been revisions to the Tech Collaborative Agreement. The Board of Directors have voted on that, but this school committee would also need to vote on that. And so I am looking for you to approve the revisions of the Tech Collaborative Agreement.
Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. I'm a big fan of tech, and I think Medway made the right decision
Too.
So that's great. Are there any questions from members on this? I understand that we need to take this vote tonight in order to be able to submit it back to tech. Is that right, Dr. Kavanaugh?
Yes, Liz McGonigal said she would need this back by April 30th. So while we are all here tonight, we should take that vote if you're prepared to.
Oh, absolutely. I feel prepared. Is there someone ready to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the revisions.
A
Motion
second.
by Meg and second by Nancy. We'll do a roll call vote. Meg,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Amanda,
Aye.
Jen,
Yes.
and I'm a yes as well. And so that carries forward unanimously. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. And by the way, I'm going by the order in which you're all appearing on my screen. I don't know how everyone else is appearing to others.
You look like the Brady Bunch.
The next item on the agenda, lunch heroes donation, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Yes, so I'm really just looking for the committee to accept a very generous gift. You know that we have been putting out all kinds of information about getting kids and families fed during the school closure. So we have a lot of students who would typically get free or reduced lunch in our public schools. That particular account was actually operating at a deficit. And so the Hoptown Legacy volunteers, on behalf of Legacy Farms North and South, sort of put out their own collection. And I'm very, very grateful to them. They have presented us with $2,054.26 that will go to students who need free and reduced lunch, both sort of in the past and currently as we move through the COVID-19 coronavirus shutdown.
Oh, this is excellent.
It
I
is.
know they had pulled together this group not too long ago, Deepika Aruri and a bunch of folks, and I know Heather Smith was also trying to help them out. So this is fabulous. So many thanks to the group for having done this. I'm looking for a motion to accept, unless there are some other questions, comments from others.
Just very generous, and I am thankful for all of the people who are stepping forward through this and many other efforts in town as well. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Very well said, Nancy. So many people being so generous around town, right? So looking for a motion to accept the $2,054.26 for lunch heroes donation.
I move to accept the donation.
Moved by Meg.
Second.
Second by Nancy. We'll do a roll call vote. Meg,
Aye.
Nancy,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Amanda,
Aye.
and I'm a yes as well. And so that carries unanimously as well. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Sure.
Moving on to old business, school committee procedure for evaluation. Ms. Fagiano.
Okay.
So I will click stop share and you can take over.
And I can start share. Okay.
I think so.
Yeeks. Hang on. Okay. Do you see anything?
Yes.
We can
Yep.
see that.
Okay, so just to quickly take you back to where we were several meetings ago, one of our next steps following our discussion of the superintendent review indicators, which we did, was for the procedure working group, which is Mina and myself, to try to draft a procedure for the formative and summative superintendent evaluations. And um, this work happens every year, whether we have a documented procedure or not, as you know. So in a way, I think this is somewhat academic, um, but it is important because while there are guidelines from MASC, every school district has decisions to make about what they do and how they do the reviews and how they go from, say, individual thoughts to a composite feedback and so forth. So it's important to, when you're not in the throes of doing the work, to actually, I think, step back and see how ideally this process should run so that when we get to April and May, doing the summative review, we all know what we need to do. Dr. Kavanaugh knows what we're doing, and hopefully we do it well. So that was sort of the spirit behind this. And again, it's procedural. So each year the school committee with its new members can change this and review this. So this is just a place for our 5 people to start. So can you now see the draft?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So we drafted a procedure, and really 90% of this was lifted directly from MASC. They have a very detailed sort of guideline for how to approach these reviews. While it is detailed, again, there are areas where they use vague language and leave the details up to the school committee and the district. So throughout this draft document, we've put in yellow areas where we think the 5 of us need to come back and have conversation. So I'll quickly kind of go through the whole document, and then we can come back to the yellow areas, which I pulled out in a separate questions to chat about document. Does that make sense? Okay. So for the time being, again, I've called it BBA PRC1. BBA is a policy that we don't actually have in our manual. That's sort of a conversation for another day. But that policy is a policy that just basically outlines the legal job of the school committee. So we may be, as a policy group, bringing that forward for consideration. If we don't end up adding BBA to our policy manual, we will give this procedure another name. So don't be distracted by that. So basically, I'm actually going to start at the end, which is really probably not what you normally do. But this diagram at the end that I appended is the MASC graphic that depicts their high-level 5-step process for a superintendent evaluation. It begins and ends with a self-assessment. It goes into sort of goal setting and analysis, and then the implementation of a plan, and the formative, and then the summative. So that is their high level view, which we used for reference. So I'll take you back to the top. So we have taken that, adjusted it just a little bit. Mina put this very nice graphic together, and we put some general a timeline associated with each step as well. But basically, as you all know, the school committee at 2 points throughout the year or throughout a cycle reviews the superintendent. Right here in number 4, the formative evaluation, which is an informal midpoint check-in, and at the very end, the summative evaluation, which is a formal public opportunity for the school committee as a whole to present an evaluation of the superintendent. Always on camera, always fun. So we have added into the 5-step process this extra step. As we were going through detailing what it would mean to do the superintendent evaluation, we found that there was quite a bit of meat in preparing for the composite review. And we are obviously 5 individuals, and we have our own experiences throughout the year with the superintendent and the work that is done, and our own way of thinking about that. And we all take a stab at our individual evaluations. And the process that we as a committee use to go from our individual input to the final composite review is what we would put in this preparation phase. That's actually kind of where the meat of the work, I think, is for us. So just to quickly go through each step at a high level, around June or July, as really already happens, the superintendent would do a self-assessment of how the last year went, and how the year has gone, with based on goals, the focus indicators or target indicators from the rubric, and every indicator in the rubric, because the superintendent is responsible for all of them on some level. For each step in this, we put inputs and outputs. So the inputs into the self-assessment would be, among probably others, the district strategic plan, any metrics that we are looking to improve as a district, the school improvement plans, and any feedback that came out of the formative evaluation. The outputs would be the superintendent's own self-assessment and identified areas for goal setting. And this is really internal for the superintendent. We don't really see this. There's no hard output exactly. But the self-assessment is important to feed into the next step. The second step is the analysis, goal setting, and plan establishment. The inputs to this are the self-assessment. Again, the district strategic plan. MASC is very firm in wanting our evaluation and our goals to tie to a plan. So they always reference back to the district strategic plan, and we should do the same. The school improvement plans, and again, any other metrics. The outputs of this would be the roughly 5 or so SMART goals that Dr. Kavanaugh identifies usually at the end of the summer. We have this happening in August. And at that point, going forward, we as a committee should agree on the target indicators for the superintendent evaluation. This year we did that in, I think, like February or March for the first time, but going forward, we should, at the beginning of the cycle, set those indicators. We would then move into the implementation. Mostly implementing the plan is doing the work of the district, and most of that happens outside of the realm of the school committee. The input for the work of the year, the goals, the indicators, and the strategic plan. We want to take action on all of those things. The outputs during the year would be the updates that we get from Dr. Kavanaugh on goals. We get those regularly. In this document, we suggested that maybe monthly at the first meeting of the month would be a target. And then throughout the cycle, if a goal is completed during the year, that might be a time, that's why it's highlighted here, that would be a time for us to get sort of the full readout of that goal and any metrics, rather than wait till the end of the year. Just get that full report whenever the goal is completed in real time. Let's see, going from the implementation of the plan, we then move to the formative evaluation in January. This is not a written evaluation. The inputs are the goals, the indicators, the metrics, and any monthly update reports that we've received. The output would be the superintendent's self-assessment and the school committee's verbal feedback on the goals and the standards. Hold on. And the feedback may include a blend of strengths, competencies, and opportunities. And we had identified, Mean and I in discussion, that at this point also the superintendent may identify or ask for assistance with obstacles. I mean, there is also an opportunity in the middle of the year to say, you know, I was heading down the path for a certain goal and I've hit these obstacles. I need additional funding for training, or I need, you know, whatever it is that the school committee can maybe help with to remove obstacles. It is perfectly legitimate to have those requests. And then the summative evaluation would happen between sort of April and May. Again, you see a lot of yellow in this section, and we'll come back to this, but we prepare it in April. And I think, as we've done in the past, we're assuming that we would all take our time to sit back and look at the rubric. I can actually click to that if you want. I'll just quickly show you that. So this, oops, sorry, that's not the rubric. I'll click off of this. Anyway, there is a rubric, which is not linked here, which has all the indicators. We would all evaluate the superintendent on our own, and we would feed those individual evaluations to the chair. And then Mina and I are suggesting that we would hold a school committee meeting dedicated to resolving discrepancies and preparing our composite review, because it is important to remember, as is stated by MASC, that the superintendent is reviewed by only one evaluator, and that is the school committee. It is not the individuals. So we are suggesting that we have a separate meeting where a school committee gets together and goes through any ratings on any indicators that we disagree on, any comments or observations that we want included in the write-up. All of that can be worked out in a dedicated meeting before we actually present the final evaluation to the superintendent. And then our suggestion was that we do the superintendent evaluation in May. The input is the summative review, and the output would be maybe suggestions for the coming year. And so there's several things to talk about. I will go to the questions in a second, but we had written in that the Hopkinton superintendent evaluations will be done by the school committee members who serve during the last fiscal year in the evaluation period. So we want to make sure that if you were on the school committee this year, you are doing the evaluation. We don't want a newly elected member who hasn't had the experience of the fiscal year to come in and do a review. So that brings us to the yellow areas, which I kind of summarized here in the questions. So the first question was, what time period do we want to use? The MASC document suggests that for established superintendents 3 years or more in their position, you can move to a 2-year review if you want. Mina and I discussed this a little. We felt like a 1-year review was the most appropriate, but that's something that we as a committee should decide. So I'll stop there for a second. Any thoughts?
So this is only when someone has been the superintendent in the district for 3 or more years. But
Correct.
we would set this over 2 years. And like Amanda said, we felt that a yearly review is more appropriate and not a 2-year review that's too long a period, even for an experienced superintendent. So just wanted your thoughts on that.
So in the past, they've always done every 2 years.
We've done every year.
Well, after the first term, the first 3 years, they've done every 2 years.
I don't think so. I think they're pushing very hard to align the reviews with the goals. And I think they're trying to allow for the fact that there might be longer range goals that might span 2 years. It might take 2 years to actually meet the objective.
Yeah.
So I took it. I think this is a bit of a shift, actually, that they're suggesting that a longer timetable is possible. They're not saying what to do. They're just saying it is possible to do this. If we went to a 2-year review, the formative would be at the end of year 1 and the summative at the end of year 2.
Okay.
So previously, we did not do annually after we had a superintendent who had been in the position for more than 3 years. But I also know the MASC guidelines in the way that this has all been done has shifted. So, and that's why last year felt kind of new for everybody, regardless of how long we've been on the committee, because we hadn't done it. I don't think anybody that was on the committee last year had done it a full review like that previously.
Okay.
That is correct, Nancy. Again, it might be okay to just go forward with doing this every year. And maybe next year as a committee, everyone can just revisit it and say, do we want to switch to a 2-year or not? And I'm also curious to hear Dr. Kavanaugh's thoughts on it.
So I guess I would just say, I think that when when we made the transition to this new evaluation process, that's what they did with teachers. That's what they did with principals. So I think that this was just kind of uniform across, every single kind of layer in the hierarchy of public education. So a principal, for example, would be evaluated every year for the first 3 years, and then the principal would go on an every other year plan. So a formative after the first year and a summative after the second year. I think, over time, I guess it gets a little bit different for a superintendent, because I think sometimes you have goals that are 2-year goals that fit well. But really, it is up to sort of the will of the community, to the will of the committee. And I think it's just a matter of that compilation of a summative evaluation at the end of the year feels like a lot of work. Maybe after 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, however long a superintendent's been in place, you kind of have a sense of that person's work. So, I don't think that it really matters whether you're doing it every year or every other year. Either way, the superintendent's doing the work.
Yeah.
Or should be doing the work.
Yeah,
we can leave it.
I think, as Dr. Kavanaugh said, teachers are on a 2-year cycle. They produce, we got into this last year. They produce evidence at the end of the first year to show that they're on track, and that's part of their formative assessment. And I think, if you have an experienced superintendent who you've given positive reviews for the previous 3 years, having sort of that long-term 2-year vision is potentially a good thing. I think that if you are still receiving feedback on the goals and on the indicators in a sort of work in progress kind of form, as opposed to this is all over and we're going to start again next year kind of form, it's a little bit different, but I think it gives good insight into what the superintendent is doing. I keep looking because I've got 2 screens going on here. I think, I'd support a 2-year review for an experienced superintendent. But I also think they're essentially the same thing. It's just a little less, I guess it's probably a little less work for the school committee, because we wouldn't have to go through and file a summative assessment every year. So I guess it depends on the committee's comfort level with the person they have in that position.
I mean, for the purposes of documenting our procedure, I mean, again, we don't have to actually lay every little detail out, but I mean, we can leave this language that I highlighted. So it sounds like everyone's comfortable with the possibility of a 1-year or a 2-year. So if we leave the language as it's written, which is just that there is a possibility, it sounds like the committee is generally okay with that, and we can decide. We could even put a sentence in that says something to the effect of, during the goal setting, we agree on, the evaluation term, cycle length or something. I mean, I don't think we have to nail it down beyond this. As long as everyone is comfortable with the possibility of the 2-year, then we can just leave it as it's written. Okay. So that was easy. So the implementation of the plan. The key things here were, as a goal is completed, I think we tend to hear about that during the superintendent report. I think what we're just saying is if it's an official report out of a completed goal, we should make it a separate agenda item on a school committee meeting, and then just kind of put it to bed. Hear about it when it's done, get the full report out on that goal, be able to ask any questions on the metrics or whatever evidence we were using to evaluate that goal, and then kind of have that done, but have it done as a separate agenda item. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay. On the formative evaluation, is everybody comfortable with it being a verbal evaluation?
I am.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Do we feel comfortable if people want to give individual written feedback that they do that on their own, or do we want to make sure that we all follow the same procedure?
So I wrote that I would suggest that if if a school committee member wanted to give some feedback, I think that it would have to become in the form of a prepared statement that they read at a regular meeting.
Okay.
I think that way it would just kind of keep things out there, but it would be public. But I don't think it should be off the cuff. So I don't think it should be something that people show up and say, yeah, you did a good job with the budget this year. I think it needs to be, however many sentences, succinct, prepared. And then if you want to give that evaluation, come ready to give it, kind of thing.
Okay. Okay. So I may add, we can bring this back for a final review, but I may add just a sentence in this output section that school committee members wishing to give more official feedback should draft or should present it as a, whatever you said, Jen. Yes, as a written statement.
Right. And I think, I mean, if they don't want to write it, fine, if they have notes, but I do think it needs to be something that's prepared, and it's not just an off the cuff in that particular meeting. Here's your chance to give feedback. I think it's, you take a look at what's been offered to you, you formulate your thoughts, and you have them written succinctly to offer. So if there's anything that you're concerned with or anything that you think has been particularly awesome, you're able to call out both those things.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think also just having it as a separate agenda item will help with that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Carol, do you have any thoughts on the formative? Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that. I think that I agree with what Jen said, that there should be a consistency about it, so that if there's sort of an agreement that it's a verbal thing, even if there's something written, that it is read aloud.
Yeah.
At the time of the formative.
I agree. Okay. The summative evaluation. So how do we feel about having a preparation step? Like, so last year, when we did the summative evaluation, we individually wrote our feedback, shared it with the chair who made the composite, which we then discussed at the same time as we delivered it to the superintendent. So again, we were kind of learning, and I think it worked, but we were thinking that in the event that school committee members disagree or have more discussion they want, to enable us to reach consensus as input to the one composite review, a separate meeting to look at the summative before it's actually delivered, a creation of a composite meeting would be a good idea. How do people feel about that?
I agree. I think that makes good sense. It took forever last year, so it'd be nice to have it broken down into 2 steps.
And I think it felt too like we were talking to each other, and we weren't actually talking to Dr. Kavanaugh, whose review it was, who sat there and watched us have our conversation with each other. And it felt like it should have really been maybe 2 steps, 2 different steps.
I just want to say something there, Amanda. I think to Nancy's earlier point, we learn. Last year, when we sat through it, we were all new to that process. And, Nancy led us through that, and we were all learning through the process. And we have learned some things, and now we're making this proposal, which hopefully will work. If not, then next year there's another opportunity to revise the process a little bit. But I think we are definitely more experienced than last year.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, to some degree, it's our district's sort of our personal choice. There are certainly many districts who do that work at the same time as they deliver. There are many, many ways to get at this. So this is our opportunity to kind of say, what do we think will work for us? And we are lucky that we have last year, the same 5 people had last year under our belt, that we kind of all can process and move forward on.
I think that will add to a greatly improved process, though, having it broken out into 2 meetings like that.
You think? I mean, you were on the receiving end. Do you think it would have been nice to have a chance to talk?
I think it would have been 1,000 times better for us to have had that opportunity to talk it out first before trying to put the whole thing into one piece. But it's like Mina said, we have the value of having been through that experience, all 5 of us together, and to be able to look forward to what's a better process for next time.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that a little sort of a footnotey comment in the MASC guidelines was a suggestion that in order for something to be included in the composite review, it be highlighted by at least 2 members. So I guess I'm asking, I think I put, let me just go back. I'm not sure if I put that in here. Did I put that in here? I'm not sure, but
Which one, Amanda?
it was a suggestion that in order for something, there's always the question
Yes, it was
of
there
how,
that they
of what
have
to
to be
include.
two.
Yeah,
Right.
so having at least 2 people have a similar take in order for that to be
That
included.
large yellow paragraph that's highlighted.
Is it in here?
Your cursor is almost on it.
Yes, there we go. On the last sentence, yes. When creating the draft composite evaluation, the chair will include comments or ratings that reflect the majority and are cited by a minimum of 2 members. How do we feel about that?
I like that. I think it goes back to the point earlier that the evaluation is done by the committee, but it's still my, recollection of this is that all of the individual comments do go to Dr. Kavanaugh.
I think they're all public record, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Amanda?
Hmm.
As part of that summative evaluation preparation, do we try to solicit comments from the public to help us? I mean, do we seek any kind of public commentary before we write our evaluations or put our thoughts together? Because I know we all have a unique view here of what's going on, but I'm always eager to kind of tap into what the larger public is thinking too.
I don't have an answer for that. That's hard and fast, but I think as we each think about the goals and the rubrics and the evidence and the explanation of the different levels of evaluation for each indicator and so forth, I think we have to decide what body of knowledge or facts we base our evaluation on. And I think whether that's, I don't know, I think we probably will each kind of do that slightly in our own way.
Yeah, I just wondered because, a lot of those questions are about community contact and communication and stuff, which we might have a less broad view of.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's just thinking out loud, getting more feedback from the public.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would say in regard to that where that kind of lives is under standard 3.
Okay.
There's that whole family and community engagement piece.
Right.
That will open very interesting things up. I think we need to be mindful of how we seek this information. That's just my view when we go to public. I think at some point I had suggested, although Amanda and we didn't discuss that in detail at all, was about a 360-degree review where, you can come up with a list of, say, peers and reports and clients that we agree with the superintendent and say, okay, this seems like a pool of people, say 5 to 10 people from whom their input is helpful into the process versus just opening it up to the public. I would not be open to just opening it up to public in general, but I think if we have some agreed upon, for instance, this past year, Dr. Kavanaugh had worked on the calendar subcommittee. And if we decide that some members of the calendar subcommittee, say Allison Sokol Orenstein, just taking the name of a member on that group, who Dr. Kavanaugh had worked with closely, was part of that. If we want to take some input from that member to say, okay, what do you think, worked well? Do you have any recommendations, on what could be better? I think that kind of a very selected one is what I would think would be fair. Um, um, in terms of evaluation rather than just opening it up fully. I mean, we all hear things, right? We do throughout the year, are absorbing a lot of things. But I think from an evaluation standpoint, you need to be mindful of who those evaluators are. We need to make sure that pros and cons and a thoughtful weigh-in has happened. And Dr. Kavanaugh also has an input on who these people are from whom we are taking the input. I speak of this coming from having experienced a 360-degree review and offering myself up for a 360-degree review in a different organization without having that requirement. So that's my take, although it does give a very good exposure and kind of, again, I feel like many times these evaluations, going into these evaluations, they tend to be so tense, at least because it's so public in nature. It's very hard, I think, to give, or I'm sure it's harder to receive any kind of, just going through that whole process, right? And
Right.
Dr. Kavanaugh produces so much evidence around it. So again, I think the process should be somewhat controlled.
Yeah, I guess just to comment on something that you just said, Mina, you said, reaching out to people who had interacted with me and who that evaluator is. But just to be clear, the only real evaluators are the 5 of you.
Yeah, as you were talking, that was something I mean, that's the job of the elected members of the school committee to do. I think that it is public, and when it's posted on the agenda that the superintendent will be evaluated and we welcome public feedback, I think that that's the opportunity for folks to say anything that they want to say via email or come to the meeting. But I think that we need, it sort of falls on us to collect the information and make the evaluation.
So I understand it's the verbiage that seemed like a problem. I did not, what I was speaking about is not evaluation, but seeking input into the process. Now, having said that, Jen, to your point, I don't know if we explicitly ask people for, public comment or what have you. But anyway, this is just thinking on the fly here, something that Meg mentioned. Amanda and I did not talk about this in terms of the process. We can all think about it a little bit. We don't have to make a decision here. I don't know, Amanda, what your thoughts are.
Well, I do think that by breaking out the preparation into a meeting, so that there is a dedicated time that the school committee meets to prepare the composite review, I think that allows for the public comment to be solicited before we're actually delivering the composite review. So, Jen, to your point, I mean, I think by giving that extra meeting where this is the topic where we're going to work on our composite review, I think it would make it easier for people to weigh in public comment if they wanted to. I also think that in most cases, Dr. Kavanaugh has done and will probably continue to do SMART goals with identified metrics. And we sort of have a handshake on a lot of things at the beginning of the year about what we're focused on and what we're going to look at for evidence in many of, at least in the goals. So I think the evidence is either there or it's not there for some things. And I think Dr. Kavanaugh does a pretty good job of finding that evidence and sharing it with us. And when it's missing, I think we need to ask for it. I think we are the ones who are responsible for this work, and we have to ask for the evidence that we need. We can ask at the formative review if we're not seeing what we need, that's a good time to check in mid-cycle. But yeah, I kind of agree, Nina, with your thoughts on that. I wouldn't want to open this. It's not, the whole community is not all contributing. It's hard enough for the 5 of us to come up with a composite review, and I think we have the perspective required and the responsibility as elected officials to do this work. So I did want
maybe Amanda, we can think about this in the next iteration as some of this is getting cleaned up and bring it back.
Yeah, definitely. If you want. I did want to ask about the timing of the summit of evaluation. We had suggested the first meeting in May, which would put it before the election. It's a little bit before, it's a little early. It's not quite the end of the year yet, so it does cut the cycle a little bit short. We had suggested that the last meeting in April is when we would do our work to get the composite ready, and then the first meeting in May. Does that seem reasonable as a target? Dr. Kavanaugh, how do you feel about that?
I'm fine with that timeline.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
Fine.
So is there anything else, at all about the general procedure that, we should have thought about and we didn't, or that you want to add, or that you don't like? I mean, we'll definitely come back and review this again, but not in this great detail. But now that we've walked through it, we can all kind of go sit with it for another couple weeks and come back at our next meeting and agree on it. But in the meantime, is there anything you want us to take as an action item aside from this comment about other inputs?
No, I think it looks I guess it looks like what I would anticipate it would look like.
It should, because it came largely from MASC, again,
Yeah.
with just a few areas where I wanted to make sure that we were in line with the recommendations of MASC.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for doing all this work. This is great. And hopefully it's going to streamline the process for not just us, but for future committees. It's a lot of work. Good job.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
All right.
So I'm going to unshare.
All right. Sounds good. On that front, I also just want to quickly touch base about the fact that while we're talking about the procedure and the timelines and whatnot, maybe something to think about is for this year, especially in light of COVID-19 and all that's going on, the timelines that apply for this year may be worth thinking about for Dr. Kavanaugh and as to when all of this can be done. So if you can think about that, Dr. Kavanaugh, and let us know.
Sure.
Maybe next time what you think is reasonable and fair.
Yes. And we've been talking about that even with teacher evaluation, administrator evaluation, just because a lot of the work that we would be doing now at this time of year around evaluation, people just aren't available for it. But, I think relative to my goals and the indicators that we had chosen, I think I'm probably able to present information to you that's pretty complete.
Great. Thank you. The next item on the agenda, Student Opportunity Act, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Yes, and I know that I had said in my superintendent's report that the Student Opportunity Act is delayed. So when we get more information from the commissioner, I will certainly bring that forward and we can take a look at it. But for now, I think we can just sort of put that on hold a little bit until we get the actual information from the commissioner. We don't even have a date by which it is due yet. He just said that it would be, that he's petitioning to push that out.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Sure.
The next, unless someone has any questions on that. Did I just receive? No. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, future agenda items. I would hope we continue to get some updates on COVID-19. I think that's going to continue to happen, but besides that, I think we're good.
Of course.
Moving on to the next item, public comments. Anything, Nancy, that you may have received? You're on mute, Nancy.
Sorry, I have not received any additional comments.
Okay, thank you. One thing that I have continuously heard through texts and email is the quality of the recording. And I think it's crucial, especially now that we're doing this public meeting virtually, that we make sure that it's transmitted appropriately and folks are able to participate. So I guess we will continue to learn and improve. I'm very thankful for HCAM for having participated through all of this. And sometimes those snags happen. So hopefully that'll get resolved for next time. And we appreciate the patience of public on all the questions that they have. Hopefully the recording would work. If not, if you're not able to see that recording through HCAM, please feel free to send your questions to the school committee, HPS school committee at hopkintonk12.ma.us, and we will answer your questions. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, items by consensus, Dr. Kavanaugh.
Okay. So as superintendent, I recommend that the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Nancy.
Second.
Second by Jen. We'll do a roll call vote. Meg.
Aye.
Nancy.
Yes.
Amanda.
Aye.
Jen.
Yes.
I am an aye as well. And so that carries. Thank you, Dr. Kavanaugh. It's time for adjournment. Looking for a motion.
I move that we adjourn. I have things to do.
That's hilarious. Thank you, Professor Tyler. A motion by Professor Tyler in her wonderful costume to adjourn. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
A second.
Not looking nearly as cute.
It's a good hat, isn't it?
It is. Motion by Meg, a second by Jen. We'll do a roll call vote again. Jen.
Yes.
Meg.
I distracted you, didn't I? Aye.
Nancy.
Yes.
Amanda.
Aye.
And I as well. And so we are adjourned. Our next meeting will be on April 9th at 7 p.m. It is very likely that it will be a virtual meeting. We are expecting to have an executive session as well as a regular meeting. In the meantime, stay safe, be well, reach out and seek support, offer support, and do some disc dancing. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.